I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. And you know, it's all about the neighborhood. This is a conversation about how we build our community, our neighborhood, house by house, family by family. We're focusing on business creation, business development, economic development, and culture. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. My guest today is Scott Gray. He's a colleague, a friend, a young elder in the community. He's the president, CEO of the Minneapolis Urban League, and a leader committed to changing the game. How do we change education? How do we change civic engagement? How do we change workforce development? How do we change, enhance, augment business opportunity for our community? Scott, let's talk about that. Thank you, first of all, for your leadership, your service to the Urban League. Let me say for our viewers and listeners that I work with you as the board chair of the Urban League, and it's been my pleasure to be a part of the team working with you. You've done a great job.
Sure.
But
Likewise.
let's talk about the Urban League. The Urban League mission and vision, first of all, and lead that to a discussion around enabling and empowering our people towards business and engagement and workforce.
Sure. Well, thank you, Al. Really the mission is about closing the gaps that we see for African Americans in this community. We have a long history, 88 years in this community in Minneapolis, but a 100-year history as part of a national movement. We are a movement, and part of it in Minneapolis. And so our goal is to work to close the gaps in education, workforce development, economic development, and health. And so we think if we can work on those strategies that we can make this a better place for African Americans, but a better community as it relates to Minnesota.
One of the innovative ideas you've authored and presented is the 13th grade. Mm-hmm. We always talk about the challenges of public school education. We know that a lot of people are falling through the cracks. And you've proposed an idea that creates a bridge. People that have not been properly served or connected through public education, giving them a gateway, a pathway to career change, career development. Talk about that if you would.
Sure. Well, we are really wanting to zero in on the population of 17 to 24 or 17 to 25. This is a population of very disconnected young adults that in some ways have not been successful in the traditional educational system, and we're working on creating a way to reconnect them. Mm-hmm. We feel that this is this category, the 17 to 25, has the highest unemployment rate, the least amount of skills. They are very disconnected from the economic development plan for the state of Minnesota. They are primed to maybe go into the criminal justice system or participate in behavior that is not going to be productive for the region or the city. And so we want to figure out how can we change that, and how can we create a platform and an opportunity for them to be part of this new economic development plan, this growing community that we call the Twin Cities here, and how can we incorporate and integrate them into this plan, essentially growing your own workforce, growing your own entrepreneurs locally. We think that there's some opportunity in these youth, and they've just been disconnected because we as a community have overlooked them.
And so your plan is to do what?
Our plan is to really connect them through a couple of ways. One is to go out and get them where they are. Mm-hmm. And so we see a lot of these young adults in places that are not places of learning, are not places where people are wrapping their arms around them and helping them achieve their dreams. So we got to go out and get them where they are, and sometimes on the corners, right? And then we got to bring them in. If they want the opportunity to change and to move their life forward, we want to bring them into kind of a structural boot camp kind of setting. Assess them for where they are. A lot of them are unfortunately not at the grade level or at the level of where they can be productive with a career ladder opportunity. And so we want to take a look at that and figure out how we can help them where they are, start to work on the navigational approaches to figure out what have been some of their barriers, whether it's low achievement in math and reading and getting them a tutor or what have you to start to work at getting ready to take the GED exam and to pass it successfully. Then we want to connect them to a post-secondary opportunity or a credential that is in alignment with where they are and what they want to do. Then we want to walk them into a credential program or a post-secondary opportunity. We have partnerships with a number of college institutions across the state. And then we want to make sure that that pathway leads to a career ladder opportunity.
You visited California and worked with some successful programs that do this kind of work.
Absolutely.
And what are the models that really inspire you and guide you?
So Delancey Street is the model that you're talking about in San Francisco. They have started to replicate their model across the country and really looking at replicating it across the world. As we look at this project, we see the same 17 to 25, particularly African-American men, not only in Minneapolis, St. Paul, but in Chicago, Detroit. We're seeing the same issues, the same problems, and it's causing a lot more havoc in other communities than it is our community right now, but that may change quickly.
It will come, yeah.
And so Delancey Street has really taken specifically ex-offenders and as they are coming home, leaving the penal system, they have taken them in, almost 500 folks a year, where they house them, where they have created enterprising opportunities. They have a national moving company, they have a print shop, they have an automotive shop. They have almost 10 to 15 business operations that they run, a cafe, a catering business. And they have these operations led by ex-offenders, which is just a great story. When you walk to that facility or walk up to that facility, you would think that it's the Taj Mahal or something. It does not look like what we might think of a residential treatment center or a nonprofit social service agency. It looks like a place where business is being conducted and the participants are the folks that are getting the services but running these businesses, and essentially 90% of their income comes from their enterprises.
It's 2 or 3 city blocks, I think, big.
Absolutely.
And it looks like a mixed-use development.
Yes.
Modern, advanced, retail, light industrial, and the residential component, as you said.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, it's starting to, they've been doing this for 30 years, but they're starting to replicate their model across the country. When we went out there, we talked about how could we replicate the same kind of model because we're seeing the same challenges in our community, and we got to figure out how to put folks to work. And so we were able to get a partnership with them or a partnership agreement that we can look at creating a similar model here in the Twin Cities. And so so the 13th grade is kind of a start of that. They took ex-offenders when they created this model 30 years ago. They took ex-offenders and utilized them to build their own facilities. So all these state-of-the-art facilities have been built by ex-offenders and partners of Delancey Street, so large construction companies, foundation partners. I mean, it was a true community effort to build this model, and as you said, it's 2 to 3 blocks large, it's state-of-the-art, and it looks just amazing, and we should be able to do that in this town.
What I like about the idea, Scott Gray, is that at some point in time it also considers the fact that we have to find alternate revenue streams to support the work of saving our community.
Sure.
Saving us really is going to eventually depend on us.
Absolutely.
What we do, what we produce, what we create. And we have to also shift our vision of who we are from that of being simply consumers, but producers as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that your focus on entrepreneurial models to undergird civic work is the right focus for the future.
Sure, sure. And so, you know, we call it social enterprise,
Yes.
but it really is about operating like a business. And like I said, Delancey Street, about 90% of their revenue is driven by profits from their enterprises. And, you know, you could look at Goodwill Industries and their model, and it's pretty similar model, working with more maybe a challenged, a different population of folks that need employment opportunity as well. But there's nothing saying that we can't create that same kind of model. When I look at the Twin Cities, there's two things that I find a little challenging in this town. One is that we've overlooked this 17 to 25 population and getting them to the opportunities and being emerged in this larger regional plan. The second is the lack of business kind of creation opportunities for African American entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs in this town, that we got to do a better job of figuring out how to pool our resources together and to connect to those public institutions that we have here, and some of these large global companies that are doing big business. We should have more businesses of color, particularly African American businesses in this town, because when you grow up in very urban areas and when you don't see folks living the dream and you dream about owning a business, and you can walk into a business and see someone that looks like you operating this business, you feel like this may be possible.
That's right.
But when you don't see this in our community as much as we should, it leaves us challenged, and it leaves us thinking that maybe our career is about going to work for somebody else. And so I think you can do both.
Yeah.
And I think that this community offers a lot more than other communities. I mean, look at what happened in Detroit some years ago. I know Detroit is going through a struggle, but look how many big African-American firms were created from that model of working with the big three auto suppliers. I mean, we have some big threes here as well, some big three companies that can really help take us to scale. And I was just reading Cargill the other day and its large commitment to minority-owned businesses. But at the end of the day, we got to get beyond the talk and really start to make ourselves accountable to growing these opportunities, because they don't only create equity for our communities, they create jobs and they create possibility, and dreams start to come true for all others that want to follow behind them.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll continue this conversation in just a minute. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome back to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Scott, thanks for setting up this conversation. I want to introduce a couple of young people, young entrepreneurs who I think represent what you and I and our colleague Ravi Norman, who's CEO of Thor Construction, are working for. And that is the opportunity for our people to see ourselves as entrepreneurs, to use our imagination, our genius, to bring products to market. Damola, Ogundipe, and Shawntera are with a company that they've created called Civic Eagle. Civic Eagle has developed some apps that create civic engagement. A phenomenal idea. It's an appropriate discussion for today, because we're talking about how do we get our people civically involved, and what's the business of doing that, the business of solving problems. Damola, thank you for being here. Talk about Civic Eagle. What's the concept? What's the vision?
Well, Civic Eagle is an information and communications technology company that is geared towards increasing civic engagement within communities, even just individuals. And civic engagement is a combination of voter turnout, increasing voter turnout at the federal level, the state level, the local level, as well as engaging with your community. You spoke about kind of working with organizations and things of that nature as individuals. That's part of civic engagement, is working with organizations that promote and facilitate engagement between individuals and organizations. And that's really what we are, is a company that's trying to do that in an inclusive and holistic way.
When did you start the company, and what's your status right now?
We started the company about 2.5 years ago, actually. That was the genesis of the company. Now, its actual legal formation was this year, 2014. But from a conceptual perspective, we've been working on this idea for about 2.5 years now.
Shawntera, I reached out to you to make this conversation happen, and you were excited in telling me the potential and the vision. And share that. You think this is really a real business, number one, but also serving a real need and introducing technology that helps us become who we will become as a people.
Exactly. As we think about our civic engagement levels right now, we're at a low. And we're at a time in our policy process where we need as much participation as possible. Our communities are suffering, and we have placed representatives in office to speak on behalf of us, to represent us. And so the vision to be able to, number one, meet people where they are, and everyone's on their phone, everyone is using information and technology to engage with each other. And so Civic Eagle is looking to do just that, to level the playing field, to provide information on what's happening in our policy and political processes, but also to provide a outlet for individuals to learn about the process, but to connect with the other people. So we're really excited.
And you've launched that locally, right, so far?
Yes.
Tell me about the launch.
We launched.
Describe how it works. Describe
All right.
the app.
We launched here in Minnesota. We have a couple platforms. It's more than an app. Our first platform is Eagle, and we are focused first in terms of the information at the federal level, and so looking to provide information on congressional policy that's happening to connect with your congressional leaders.
Okay, and then the next level is what?
With the support of investment and partners, we are hoping to take the information from the federal level to include state level information, local level information, so that we are able to really look at local politics and look at local processes to help people to become a part of the process.
I'm excited and interested in how you have come together as a group of young professionals, and you've pooled your knowledge and your energy, I'm sure your treasure, to bring this to market. But tell your backgrounds, first of all, because I think you are impressive, and I commend you and your families for getting you to where you are now. Damola, what's your background?
Well, I'm actually an immigrant. I was born in Nigeria, moved to the United States with my mother and my father and my younger brother at the time. My younger brother, when I was 6 years old. And I've grown up in Minnesota, so I consider myself a Minnesotan. Attended the University of Minnesota, actually played football, ran track at the University of Minnesota. So I was kind of a multi-sport athlete, as well as trying to be socially engaged at the University of Minnesota. I became a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Started doing a lot of volunteer work through the organization, through Alpha Phi Alpha. And that kind of led me working within the confines of Alpha to really understand how important civic engagement was. We have several programs within the fraternity geared towards increasing voter turnout and increasing civic engagement. So my background really is within the realm of business. I actually got a degree in finance at the University of Minnesota through the Carlson School of Management. But then also just from understanding and being socially aware and conscious of my community, of me as an individual, of the people that I care about, and understanding how all of those things are intertwined, that you can't have one without the other, that you can't have social and civic engagement without understanding the business side of it, and trying to find a way to be able to create a platform that does that. And then utilizing my background as a young African-American man and knowing the things that I care about and that I treasure, and how to kind of portray that in a platform, because I know that me as an individual, I'm not limited in my ability to be able to project what I feel like a large amount of people would utilize, right? We're not, as a people and me as an individual, marginalized to the point where I don't understand what people need, right? Not just for myself or people that look like me, but for the community at large. So for me, it was about creating a platform that really did that showed that, we can create dynamic technology, keeping in mind what my background is and my abilities are, to foster something that is paramount in the future of our society, not just minorities or segmented or marginalized part of communities, but for everybody.
Global impact.
It's a global, exactly.
implications.
And we're not just, Shawntera pointed out that we launched in Minnesota, but we're having a national launch in September. And our plans are that we take what we have and expand it to democracies around the world, because there's platforms that are needed to help facilitate democracy, right? Provide information, make it more social, make it more enjoyable to the user, and understanding that it's an inclusive and holistic experience, not just for the people, but for the other entities like organizations, like politicians, elected officials, students, et cetera. So it's
Shawntera, what's your background? And how did you join this team, first of all? And who else is on the team with you guys?
How about you tell us a little bit more about the rest of the team?
all right. So the rest of the team is made up of 5 other African Americans, and I always say that it's on purpose as much as it is a complete coincidence. On purpose because when we were forming the team, we wanted to make sure that we had the best people that we could possibly get. It's just a coincidence that those best people happen to be African American. So we're not a team that we were like, oh, we need all African Americans to be on the team. Shawntera came to us about 2.5 months ago and joined the team as our director of external relations. So she's 1/6 of the team, and she's been doing a great job. She's got great community contacts within the state of Minnesota, as well as nationally. She's been a lobbyist for a number of years and has worked in social and civic engagement for probably at least the last 30, 40 years, Shawntera. So we have 2 other members of the team that are tech focused. Those are our developers. They're not too well versed in their background from a social or civic engagement perspective, but their technical capabilities are astounding. They've had startups, sold startups. They've been part of startups that they were brought onto. They understand what we need from a tech development standpoint. And so we have 2 great developers on the team. Then we have a data analytics expert. One of the things that we truly care about is making sure that we create a personalized experience. And the only way that we can personalize the experience for users is by making sure that we understand who that user is, right? And the only way we can understand who that user is by analyzing that user, right? So that's where our data analytics expert comes from. He's got 3 master's degrees from top universities around the country, and that's why I say we are surrounding ourselves with the best people. And then the 6th person on the team, she hails from New York actually, and she is our communications and actually user interface developer. So she kind of is a dual wielding sword, and she's also got I think 3 master's degrees from a couple different universities in New York. And she brings great expertise also because she's also worked with the New York State Legislature, and she's a great designer. So she ends up designing a lot of our what you would look at in the application, what you visually see as a user. She designed all of that. That's where her expertise lies, as well as within legislation and communications and things of that nature.
Sounds exciting. So what's the vision? We mentioned about the global potential. So in your mind's eye, where do you see this going? And how does it go there as a business? What's the value? And how's the business argument going to work?
Okay. Well, the numbers that we care the most about is 60, 40, 20. 60 is the voter turnout at the federal level, 60%. 40% is the voter turnout at the state level, and 20% is the voter turnout at the local level. Really, those numbers should be reversed. It should be 60 and still 40 and 20, because the local impact and local government is what has the most daily impact on your life. And people seem to not really truly understand that. So for us, it's about increasing the voter turnout at those levels. Now, from a business perspective, if you can increase voter turnout and go from 20 to 30%, 30 to 40% at the local level, 40 to 50 and 50 to 60 at the state, getting up to 70 and 80, 90%, like most advanced democracies around the world are at the federal level. There's an area of opportunity there because there are politicians and elected officials and organizations that are looking to increase voter turnout in order to facilitate and increase their broadband appeal. There's a $200 billion electoral market, right? So anytime that there's an election, there's money being spent at the local, the state, the federal level. And, we hear all the time about campaign finances, but we only really look at it at the federal level. How much money is being spent at the federal level for campaign finances? Looking at how much money President Obama spent or whoever is running at different state levels is spending. And that accumulates up to $200 billion. A lot of that money is spent inefficiently. It's spent on TV commercials that reach the wrong audiences. It's spent on, they started looking at more social media spending, looking at how to spend money on Facebook and Twitter and those types of companies. And there's no real true platform that brings and utilizes and brings together people on one platform, so that not in the aspects of advertising to them, but being able to actually engage with those people, right? So one of our main things is, well, forget advertisement. We don't want our elected officials to be products. I mean, what an advertisement is, you're selling a product.
Right.
We want our elected officials to be people that we care about and that we believe care about us. So we want to create a platform that allows that interaction to actually be able to occur. And we believe that there's because of that $200 billion market, that there's a space there for us to be able to capture what, if even a small chunk of that, would amount to a large amount of revenue. And by using technologies that are to scale, by using technology that is efficient, by utilizing technology that you can actually create more value out of, but reduce the amount of cost to those elected officials and organizations that would want to be intermediaries on that platform, we believe that we can make a good amount of revenue, and based off of our valuations, we think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And this is the tip of the iceberg, right? This is the starting point. And
Yeah.
so you have brought a product that turns over into more doors of opportunity, because it's a question of engagement, right? Connecting people, creating community. So talk more about that.
I think, and just a little bit about my background. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. I'm a Rust Belt girl. And for me, in terms of that engagement piece and really wanting to be authentically connected to the process, we didn't have that in Youngstown. We didn't see anybody who looked like us in elected office, and we had a lot of corruption in our process. And growing up in Youngstown, for me, inspired wanting to understand the process, but also wanting to change the process. My educational journey started at Ohio State. I graduated at Ohio State, and after graduation, I worked in the Ohio legislature, and so I was one of the highest ranking staff members in the Ohio House of Representatives, and came here to Minnesota, and after working as a city planner with the city of St. Paul, I became a lobbyist with Health Partners. And so being able to see firsthand the process on both sides, being an actual employee, but also lobbying the process. And in the Minnesota State Capitol, not many people of color in the process. And so for me, with respect to being at this tipping point of knowing how important it is to engage, we're hoping that the engagement goes from just getting the information to actually advocating. And so how do we increase the number of people that are going to testify and they have the information that they need? How do we get more employees in the Capitol, in City Hall, at the county level? How do we get more lobbyists? How do we get more elected officials that look like us? Because we know our story, we know our experiences. And so being able to have individuals that come from those backgrounds as a part of the process is going to be so important. And as we think about Minnesota, even though that's just one piece of the platform that we're trying to impact, Minnesota's getting browner and grayer. And if we're not preparing ourselves to be a part of the processes, and we're not preparing ourselves in the way that we have the best information to do that, our communities will continue to suffer. We'll continue to have the gaps that Scott mentioned that are happening in education, that are happening in healthcare. And so we're hoping to be a powerful tool in that toolbox to be able to change the trajectory of what's happening in our communities. And so we're excited about that.
And the benefit that's obvious to me is putting our people in place in the political decision-making process, enabling
Absolutely.
us to have direct impact, to have knowledge, and to be able to act in our own behalf, in our own agency. And that should result in more of our people, both on staff and elected positions around the state or the country. And with more people elected and deciding public policy, it also means other people have business opportunity. And so I turn to Ravi Norman, who is the CEO of Thor Construction. Thor Construction is known both here and around the world, but the notable big project is their work with the builders of the Viking Stadium and other projects. And Ravi, how important is it to have a public policy environment that supports the opportunity that you seek as a business owner and business entrepreneur going after public and private sector businesses, contracts?
Sure. So, first, we do probably, honestly, 80% of our business in the private sector right now, and only 20% in the public sector. Even though I think the spend money is probably larger in the public sector, policy is critical to being able to create, I think, some at least incentives to level the playing field. I don't know that it necessarily gives any real distinct advantages because it's not quotas that exist out there, but it certainly sets a context for fairness, which I think is all anybody's really asking for at the end of the day, is the ability to have access to opportunity and the ability to compete. On the Viking Stadium, as an example, legislation set forth by Commissioner Kevin Lindsay instituted a 32% workforce goal on the Viking Stadium, 6% women. So that's 38% of the workforce being comprised of what I guess you could call qualifications of underutilized communities. And so that's a big deal. And even though it's a goal, and people say, well, that goal means that people can still wiggle out of the goal on these concepts of things like good faith, but at least it's a quantitative mechanism for saying this is what we aspire to. And if people aren't going to take the necessary behaviors and actions to try and achieve those outcomes, it at least makes people be able to say, well, why not? And really clear why not. On our particular project, we're making those goals, which is wonderful. And at Thor, our position is, a goal doesn't even matter. It's really just a way of how we do business and a philosophy. The same thing is true on the contracting side. So they set goals around underutilized contractors. On the Viking Stadium, it's 20%, 11% women, 9% minority. In our business, we tend to look at those goals as a floor. And we try to just say, let's just maximize opportunity. But you need that public policy to be able to push incentives to some people who have maybe a philosophical difference in how they look at the marketplace.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll continue this conversation in just a minute. Stay tuned. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome back to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Let me continue with Ravi Norman, who's CEO of Thor Construction. Tell this Thor story. It's a phenomenal story. A local Minneapolis-based, Twin Cities-based business that is now global in nature, and you're driving the ship.
Yeah, well, I'm driving the ship with a bunch of hands on the wheel, including our owner-founder, Richard Copeland, who founded the organization in 1980, continues to be the chairman of our organization. But unlike a typical chairman that maybe just comes to board meetings and, asks me some really pertinent questions, he's very active. So at any minute, it seems like we're interchanging pieces from who's chairman, who's CEO, who's president, who's COO. We're just that engaged in the business. And it really is an American dream story, in my opinion. Richard founded the organization in 1980, and it's a kind of funny story the way he did it. He had a truck, and he was ultimately some NSP utility workers that he saw. He just happened to see them working. He followed them back to where the office was, went in and met with the manager and said, hey, I can do this work. And the guy said, yeah, you probably can. Well, Richard, came to some agreement, and it was not a formal agreement, left and came back later. He came back, he had done all the work, and he came back and said, hey, I'm finished, I want to be paid. And they said, wait a minute, we don't have an agreement with you yet. And so that level of tenacity probably is a hallmark of, I think, Thor. In fact, when I kind of think about the success of Thor, I always start with this SIT concept of how you get to the table. And I love acronyms if you get to know me even better, Al. And the S in SIT is show up. And show up persistently and with a level of tenacity. And that's one of the things I think Richard has always had in our business is this concept of you got to show up, you got to be present to win. Is a big part of the organization. So over the years from 1980, Richard went through all the kind of the incremental stages of successful entrepreneurship. So when they have programs like the 8A, they design those programs with a certain level of tenure or years that you have to try and grow your business. The goal is to ultimately, by the end of that time frame, get to a certain level of capacity, revenue, size. Doesn't happen far enough. It doesn't happen. The mobility just hasn't been there traditionally. Richard and Thor is one of the few stories of those who've actually graduated from the program because of size, which is the goal and what we want to have happen. And that'll lead us to probably a larger discussion with the whole group about what are some of the obstructions to capital allocation that really, I think, depress that mobility. But he was able to do that, and as and really in an elite, and I think in a niche marketplace of minority entrepreneurship, not just in construction but across all industries and sectors. We've grown the business now to where we are, well known as one of the top, depending on where your statistics are coming from, one of the top African-American owned construction firms in the United States.
And in the world, I understand.
And in the world, because the United States does have a lot of the largest, especially as it relates to African-American. We tend to oscillate between ourselves, Smoot, and Russell, that people know out of Atlanta. It's provided us an opportunity to go be multi-regional. We've been able to create 7 offices around the United States that range from New Orleans and Florida, in Atlanta, all the way to California, Las Vegas, now St. Louis, and North Dakota. In addition to, we've been able to have some international expansion, including we just built 750 houses for USAID in Haiti, not in Port-au-Prince where a lot of the devastation was, but in Cape Haitian, which is in the northeast. And my French Creole folks would tell me I didn't say that correctly, but so we really have had, it's been a blessing and a lot of expansion. And in every organization, when you have that kind of expansion, you have that kind of success, the most important asset in your organization is always the people. So we had some really strong people that have stayed with us through ups and downs and many economic cycles. Each one of those markets has been very distinct in terms of the business focus that we've had. In the Southwest, our Vegas and California markets have been predominantly hospitality and entertainment, as well as big box retail. Minnesota, where we're founded, is a much more of a diversified type of work. We've done a lot of community work, schools, churches. We've done stuff in the healthcare industry, as well as people know a lot of the joint ventures and strategic partnerships that we've had with Mortensen over the years. That has allowed us to not only to participate on the Minnesota Vikings Stadium as a construction manager at risk, but also, we've been selected to do the Target Center renovation that'll be starting in the spring of next year. We've had the privilege of being the CM and in that role with Mortensen on the XL Energy Center, Target Field, TCF Football Stadium, the Minneapolis Convention Center remodel. It's a plethora of opportunities and big landmark projects, and we're proud that on each of those we've been able to be fully integrated into the pre-construction, construction, and post-construction process, that we've been able to bring some, I think, some transformational ways of how you maximize participation and inclusion on all those projects at a subcontractor level and on an emerging workforce basis. We've also been able to stand alone as a GC and construction manager outside of those partnerships with relationships with Target and Best Buy, relationships with Disney, and a very significant relationship with MGM. a lot of people don't know the work that we've done in Vegas and the fact that we've been able to, we remodeled every single room of the MGM Grand.
Really?
About 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago. It was the largest renovation project for a hotel or casino ever. Almost 5,000 rooms in 42 weeks. And in all of those situations, we've been able to maximize participation and inclusion. I said it before, but I want to say it again because, it's often looked at that you can't do these big capacity projects and that you have to trade off economic performance and efficiencies to be able to get the kind of participation results that we've been used to getting at the subcontractor and emerging workforce level. And so we say it's a matter of intent and infrastructure. And the intent piece is probably as important as anything. Just the willingness to be committed. There's a lot of outreach.
Show up.
Show up. There's a lot of outreach. There's a lot of intangibles. There's a lot of teamwork that has to go into it. You have to be very efficient, accountable, and transparent with information and knowledge. But it does take infrastructure, and part of that infrastructure has to be bigger than ourselves. So organizations like the Urban League and community organizations are all kind of part of this ecosystem that have to be part of the infrastructure, because the truth of the matter is there is some capacity building requirements. There is investments that have to happen in human capital in order to be able to build up the skills necessary to get the job opportunities and be successful. As well as resources that have to be built around micro and small businesses to allow them to be able to participate in the project.
What's your personal story, Ravi? How did you come to Thor and do this work?
Well, it's interesting because, my background is economics and finance and business management, where my degrees lie. My corporate experience is in banking in Norwest and Wells Fargo. My entrepreneurial stuff was, as the syndicating loan deals. So I wasn't doing anything affiliated with construction. I was really doing how do you improve the intermediation process dealing with money. But what I learned along the way is a lot of those skills are transferable that I've picked up along the way. Without question, every business kind of has its, what I call its holy grail. It has its marketing and how you actually grow your business development, your market share, and your capitalization there. Your operations on how you actually maximize margin, and then your finance. So how you ultimately capitalize your business and try to reduce the cost of capital. The good part for me is that every business has finance in it, and so that background of finance and the way economics works, economics for me, I use it in a real practical sense. A lot of people who've had economics degrees, they say, well, how do you ultimately use it? Well, I've used it because I've been able to understand macroeconomic trends. Those macroeconomic trends impact every business, no matter what market that you're operating in. And then there's a microeconomic perspective and things about marginal decision making and marginal productivity that have to be assessed in everything that you're doing. There's almost a managerial econ process to being the best managers I think that you're ultimately going to be, and being able to both understand quantitative and qualitative aspects of that. So that allows me to be good in operations. And then the finance is the finance, the lagging indicator concept of how do you understand how to reduce the cost of capital for a business. Those are critical parts of the business. And when I met Richard, honestly, I had actually wrote the strategic plan for an organization called the MMSDC, which now Dwayne Ramsor is the president and CEO of, and that is, I think they've changed their name again to the North Central Minority Supplier Development Council. At the time when I did that, Al, the board chair was a guy named John Jorgensen from 3M, and the executive director was a guy named Tran Nan, Asian gentleman. When I went to meet with the organization, I really didn't know anything about being certified, to be honest with you, up until a friend of mine, a guy named Alvin O. Williams, who was doing certifications for me at the time, said, hey, Ravi, you should get certified. And I'm like, okay, well, I have, MBA, got that. I really didn't know, or CFP or CPA, or those are kind of the certifications I was used to. And he said, no, if you're 51% owned, controlled, and managed as an African-American, Native American, Hispanic American, so forth and so on, you can get certified. And I said, okay, well, I don't understand the advantage of getting certified because I'm in the kind of the financial services business, and I don't, you're kind of competing against the big 5 accounting firms or Deloitte's and some others. I said, I don't think they're going to buy from a one-man financial services institution. I don't think. He said, but I said, okay, so what's the barrier to entry? How much does it cost? And at the time, it was like $150. Well, that was easy. I said, okay, good, I'll do that. Filled it out. And then I got to go to the trade show at the River Center. And it really was a eye-opening experience for me because I got to see a really significant disequilibrium condition. And disequilibrium for me means that there was a lot of chaos, a lot of opportunity, and a lot of threat, I thought. And so that first morning, there was a CEO from one of the Fortune 500 companies that I'll leave his name out, but he gave a great speech in the morning. It was a breakfast, and I opened it up, and it was great. He gave a great speech, and it had, I thought when I listened to that speech, Al, that there will never be a need for a supplier diversity program. Because if those organizations are doing what that CEO just articulated, then we don't have any issues and the outcomes are going to be there.
Problem solved.
That's right. Unfortunately, by the end of the 2-day experience, what I recognized is it was a great goodwill and public relations speech. But there was a significant disconnect as I started to look at what the rest of the 2 days kind of looked like. As I walked the floor, inside those booths, and I'll call it the demand side of the equation, big Fortune 500 companies, big government agencies.
Purchasing managers.
Yeah, purchasing managers. So I found 3 people from the demand side that were, kind of down from the CEO or down from the key politician. One was procurement, so that's the purchasing side. The other was HR, and then the third was supplier diversity. And all 3 of them were in the booths. And as I got to experience some conversations with them, there were some interesting conclusions that came out of it. The first is that there was a significant amount of conversation about what I call opportunity cost. This concepts of people's time and their feeling of the amount of cost that's in their time that they could be spending doing something that they perceive to be more beneficial. So that was interesting. The other was about transaction cost, how much transaction cost they thought went into the outreach function and the identification of who's out there they may ultimately be able to do some business with and or on the HR side be able to hire. And then the supplier diversity person who's there hopefully to mitigate, at least from what you hear in the job descriptions, to mitigate some of that opportunity and transaction cost. As I spent time with them, they were kind of echoing the same sentiments, which was interesting because I thought that they were the ones that were responsible for the outreach in the first place.
And
kind
it
of
all
being
came down
throughput.
to, we can't do it.
Yeah, so they would. So it came down to a couple things of we can't find them, or either we can't find them, or when we do find them, they're not ready.
They're not
There's not
ready.
capacity there. So that was very interesting. And then so that was a noted part for me. And then as I walked the floor, you meet the MBEs, the minority business entities. And as I met with them, there were really 3 distinct characteristics that came out of those discussions. One was that there was this issue of a lack of timely disclosure that I heard, over and over again. And that came from people saying, if the RFP processes for they want to find us is going to be based on a 30, 60, or 75-day lead time, it doesn't give us much time to be able to try and mobilize in a way to increase our probability to win, get selected. And this is in particular on the procurement side. The other issue is that capacity gets delivered to us sometimes in a very nebulous way, very subjective way. That capacity is not objective and it's not transparent for us to know specifically when you say what the capacity is, we want to have it translated so we know specifically what it is. And then third, it was the development resources. They said, it's not a connected environment. So we can be over here in this procurement and HR world where people are assessing us to determine whether or not we're ready. And then it feels very exclusive to us because once we get assessed, then they tell us, okay, now go find the people who are supposed to help you and come back when you're ready, right? And unfortunately, all that data, all that information that goes on in that assessment process, I think is critical to an efficient development roadmap, right? So to me, I've always said, okay, how come there isn't all of the nonprofits and for-profits who say I'm in the business of helping you in a very specific way? How come they're not connected to that data that's going on around how people make the selection decisions, right? That should all be connected to create more efficiency, accountability, and transparency for the entire ecosystem. Hence, I said sit earlier, EAT, efficiency, accountability, and transparency are affiliated with the next part of how you do it. Because I think once you sit, you eat, and you can grow, generate real opportunity and wealth. So I could come back to that later. And so there was the other thing I noticed, Al, in that last part of those conclusions was, man, there's something fundamentally kind of wrong with who's handling the intermediation function. And no disrespect to my good brother here. I sit on a lot of nonprofit boards, and I love the mission, and I love the program, and I love what we're trying to get accomplished. But in the concept of intermediation, you don't hear the traits efficiency and accountability and transparency as the high-ranking traits of the nonprofits that I've been a part of. Scott's probably the exception, right? But so if the intermediation process to be optimized is going to require that kind of heightened efficiency, accountability, and transparency, it's kind of my perspective that I don't know if nonprofits are the right place to do that. to necessarily drive that intermediation function. They're certainly there to be capacity builders and programmers.
And maybe it means a shift.
A shift,
in
that's
the
right.
role of nonprofits.
That's right.
And that's where I see Scott going right now.
I think that's a great point, because the other side is technology. And the one thing I like about Scott is I looked at the technology and said, boy, there's not a technological infrastructure, so I'm happy to hear what Civic Eagle is doing, because I believe that there's a huge paradigm shift going on. So even if we got outside of construction, there's a huge paradigm shift that's going on around demographics, technology, and climate change. And the demographics, there's been some good discussion. A lot of people are talking about it. It impacts policy and politics. The technology piece, though, is a real critical part to what's happening, because it's reducing opportunity and transaction costs, reducing barriers to entry, increasing efficiency and scalability. And I always tell people, climate change, we have to acknowledge, if you've been paying any attention to California, then you have to acknowledge that climate change is real. Whether or not you think it's caused by man or caused by just a natural cyclicality, you have to say it's real. And that leads us to understand that we are dependent on something greater than our own ambition and our own discipline and our own will, that there is a mechanism of cooperative modeling that has to be in play for us to get the best outcomes whatsoever. And so I met Richard Copeland, just to get back to the one Thor tie for you. The way I met Richard, he was in the audience when I was delivering kind of these outcomes around the MMSDC strategic plan when I was at Cargill. And if you know Richard, and if you do, Richard came up to me and said, "Hey, I knew you were cool, but I didn't know you were that smart." He said, "So, can you help me?" And so I started with Thor just doing their strategic planning work. That strategic planning work ended up me becoming the CFO of the organization. And I spent 4 years in that role, and in 2009, I accepted the CEO's role. And I've had to kind of steward our organization through probably one of the biggest downturns in the construction industry that people can remember. And during that time, it was pretty nice to be able to rely on kind of the finance background that I had, because all of those things about capital and access to capital became very difficult. And so we felt the downturn pinch. And it's always interesting as I think about when people talk about, as we get to the participation and inclusion side, one of the things I always say is a lot of times it works like inventory. The way I see it, the model working, they have FIFO and LIFO. So LIFO is last in, first out. So that's what I've consistently seen in the marketplace.
We're down to 2 minutes. Great conversation. Impressive. I wanted to ask our guest, though, when we wrap up here, put this all together. Scott, here's a story from the inside of the construction industry. And it's the business side that Ravi represents. There's some engagement of the nonprofit and the government side. You come from a non-governmental organization that depends on and tries to move public policy. But you all are new and young, and I say beneficiaries of the energy and the knowledge and the struggle that we have fought. But you certainly have to carry that to another level. I see in your entrepreneurial and technology direction the idea that there are no limits, that the world really is your playground, and that you are both prepared and equipped to play. What do you see in that regard?
Well, first off, I want to thank both of you, because you're an inspiration to us, and you as well. Are an inspiration to us to be able to be like, oh, you know what, this is the foundation, this is the starting point, we can only take it up further from there. In terms of where we see ourselves going from that perspective, we truly believe that, like you said, the world is our playground. We're minority owned, we come from all walks of life, but we're not creating the technology specifically for people that look like us. Just like other companies, that other startups don't create technology specifically for people that look like them. And oftentimes we're marginalized when we create those technologies to be forced to say we're doing this for African Americans. Well, that is part of our mission. It's not all that we are.
But you're doing this for the world.
We're doing this for the world.
That's wonderful. We're out of time. It goes so fast. But I want to thank all of you. My special thanks to Scott Gray, President and CEO of Minneapolis Urban League, to Ravi Norman, CEO of Thor Construction, Shawntera Hardy, and Damola Ogundipe. Thank you. Damola Ogundipe, the principals in Civic Eagle. Thank you all, and thank you for listening. I'm Al McFarland. This is Conversations with Al McFarland.
I'm ex-military. I don't believe in excuses.
She brings her A game every time, and yeah, when I first saw her just putting in this work, I said, "You okay?" She said, "I'm a soldier. I can do this."
I want to get back to being able to move. My doctor and I have been talking about that for several months already. How can I get a little more active? I am active when it's warm outside, but given this past winter specifically, it's hard for me to really move the way I need to. And so this was a blessing and opportunity in itself to be a part of this, because that got me moving even more. I'm using muscles and parts of my body that I haven't used for years. And the especially good thing about it for me is my doctor had me on a statin to lower my blood pressure. The side effect with the statin is my muscles would cramp in the middle of the night, and oh my gosh, it hurt so bad. I have been off of those statins now for several months, and my cholesterol, because of the exercise and because of the diet and everything, my cholesterol is down to where it needs to be without those statins, and I don't have those cramps anymore. That's an important piece for me. So I'd rather cry because I did the work rather than cry because I took a pill. So that works for me.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We got to say goodnight. We want to thank Al McFarlane for bringing us all those great words and all our lovely guests, all the guests in the house. Everything's good, you know. So I want y'all to tune in every Tuesday morning, right around 9 o'clock. Cause we're gonna play you a song. All the guests will be home. We'll be feeling like talking. Have a robust conversation. Cause this thing is said, the message is clear.